Oh, good morning, folks. Let's talk chemistry and some, physics related things, metaphysics related things. So, I overheard a conversation between my chemistry professor and a lab instructor. So, both familiar. My lab instructor has a master's degree in chemistry. She's taken advanced lab techniques and all these chemistry related courses. So she's somewhat of a subject matter expert. My chemistry professor is the chair of the physics department and the chemistry department, so he understands theoretical physics very well. His teaching style is, in fact, tailored somewhat to the way that I think. I like to have a theoretical understanding of the subject matter as opposed to learning individual formulas and traits and things like that of the various atoms and composition of molecules. So I like to understand why things are happening. This is a show me state trait, I guess. Yes, that's great that sodium and chloride are basically made for one another, but why? Why do they seek bounds? So this conversation I overheard was basically causing me to want to erase everything that I've learned so far. Chemistry, the way it's drawn, I've posted a couple photos of some homework that I've been doing and trying to think outside myself what this shit looks like to people that are sitting next to me at Starbucks while I'm studying for exams. And it looks like hieroglyphics. It makes no sense. I had my wife go through to explain a problem on a short video, and it's hysterical to me how absurd this stuff looks. But it has to be broken down into a language that we speak in this reality, I guess, and it has to be dumbed down, I guess, to the level of my intellect. So if I'm speaking with Dr. S, we'll call him, he has to know 2 levels above the level of analysis that I'm at, so that he can field questions related to the subject matter that is at my level of analysis. And he has to be able to take these somewhat complicated concepts, theoretical physics and chemistry, and boil them down to kindergarten level so that I can receive them and understand what it is he's talking about. He has to put it to the frequency that I'm receiving, basically. The way we teach chemistry and the way I'm learning chemistry, where I have 2 lines for double bonds and single lines for single bonds, and we have covalent and ionic bonds and things like this, and energy transitions and changes in energy state and activation energy and all these things. Bonds specifically are not real. It's fantasy. It's a way for us to understand the force or the absence of force that draws 2 bodies together. And that's an interesting way to think of it in light of this other stuff that I've been listening to, this Hermeticism and Walter Russell's works. Paul, I know you're reading one of his books right now. So I listened to a little bit of the Secrets of Light and also Cosmology, and then excerpts from other writings of his. And he's talking about the idea of all matter being gendered, basically, that everything has sex, and the desire to bring those 2 characteristics together is what forms matter. It forms reality. So the example I used a moment ago, chlorine and sodium. So these are a +1 and a -1 charge, respectively. And what this means is that their outer valence shell, it has a capacity, and that's 8 as a general rule. So chlorine has an additional electron, an additional charge in its outermost shell, its valence shell. whereas sodium is missing one in its valence shell. So they're a match made in heaven, basically. You get a bond that happens between chlorine and sodium, and you get sodium chloride, which is common table salt. It forms a crystal, and this crystalline structure is a lattice work that's made of ionic bonds. Doesn't matter. So these bonds don't exist in reality. We draw a little line from the chlorine to the sodium, but in reality, there is no what we would think of as physical contact between these two atoms. These atoms are in constant motion. Their energy state is unstable because of the absence or addition in their valence shells. And what they do is they're vibrating because they're upset, let's say. So each atom is vibrating, and they fall into a configuration, but that motion doesn't stop. The motion is now transferred, and that motion exists in sort of a harmony. And Walter Russell's suggestion, Hermes Trismegistus' suggestion, is that this energy state is a spiral of the sexes toward an equilibrium point. Le Chatelier's principle analyzes this, where the energy input into a system shifts. If I put energy into the reactant side, I get a shift in equilibrium to the right, toward the product side, and vice versa. Or if I remove something, I get a shift in equilibrium in the direction of what I'm taking out of the system. This is something I was trying to relate to one of you, I don't know your real name, Counterculture, but about the equilibrium of energy systems. So if we want to get off of oil, for example, if I take oil out of the system, my equilibrium shifts. And what's on the other end of that equilibrium? Well, literally all the world's economies. All the food that we consume is the output, whereas hydrocarbons, petroleum, fuels are the input for that system. So I get a shift in equilibrium. Back to the point. The mysticism, the alternative thought, the oldest teachings, I guess, seem to have something to offer. And it seems like I've been taught so far as a neophyte, as a non-initiate. And as I'm peeking into the world of theoretical physics and the laws of motion as they're applied to chemistry, I'm realizing that what I was learning was not factual, was not true. It was merely a distillation of the truth that had to be distilled so that I could receive it. It had to be condensed to a wavelength or a frequency that I'm able to receive. So this sodium and chlorine atoms are not actually in contact with one another. This is an example I've given before, but when we think of electrons or photons, tiny particles, little packets of energy, as Einstein described them, or Planck. Planck's constant is named after another physicist. They described them as packets of energy, and these packets of energy can be measured in terms of their wavelength, a wave function, a wave of energy moving, or a particle of energy moving. And that particle and wave are one and the same. You can think of these once again as sexes of this energy thing that we're looking at. And this Hermetic tradition suggests that each thing has a corresponding thing. So if we want to talk about heat, we can look at the absence of heat. It's a continuum from hot to not hot. Cold isn't necessarily a thing. It's the absence of heat. It's the absence of movement. So we measure temperature in terms of the movement of molecules in a given thing. So my body, the processes that make up my body are made of individual atoms. Though the energy of those atoms is in constant motion. And the movement is what gives them temperature. That's what you're measuring with a thermometer. An atom can be thought of as a football stadium with a basketball, let's say, sitting on the 50-yard line. That basketball is the nucleus of that atom, and all the space around it is a cloud of energy. And this is a hard concept to grasp because we think of it in terms of like that conventional drawing where you have lines with electrons going around a nucleus, the neutron sort of picture, whatever it is you think of when you think of an atom. That isn't it. In reality, this is simply a charge, and each charge has polarity. So I have an s orbital that's spherical, I have a second s orbital that's spherical, and then I have an x, a y, and a z axis in 3 dimensions where energy is most likely to be found if I do a probability distribution using a computer. I can say that there is a high degree of likelihood that this electron, this energy, this charge will be found in this location, on this plane at a given time. And I know based on the energy level of the atom how many electrons, how much charge it has in its valence shell, where these outermost electrons are going to be located theoretically, and probability, and as far as probability is concerned. But I'm measuring them at an instant. I can tell you this electron may be here at time x, but at time x sub -1, x sub 1, that charge, that electron is no longer there, but it is also there. This is a complicated concept. Proud Pop, hello. This is a complicated concept because we think of energy in terms of electrons, in terms of heat, of movement, of fire, of electricity, of force. But energy itself is like currency. So the dollar is currency. It isn't really anything. It's fiat. It's fantasy. It's a means of exchange. And so heat, electricity, force, movement, these are all means of exchange for energy to move from one manifestation to another. Each of these manifestations follows this law of correspondence. It follows the law of polarity. It follows a rule that says that this is simply a gradient of energy that exists here. It's not positive or negative. It's not zero. It's a continuum from one polarity of this thing, this energy, to the inverse, the corresponding opposite and integral component of this energy. And for whatever reason in this reality, Paul, what's up? The energy follows a predictable pattern. As I said, the world follows the intrinsic properties of matter. So all the things we see around us, all these carbon-based life forms, ourselves, my phone, this car, everything. Spheres, cubes, and tetrahedrons. A tetrahedron is a 4-sided triangle. A cube, obvious, 6 sides. And a sphere, 1 side, one continuous side. So using these 3 components, a 1-sided object, a 4-sided object, and a 6-sided object, and then you get those platonic solids, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Paul. These are the fundamental arrangements of energy in the world. So all energy and everything that is made of energy, which is literally everything, follows a predictable pattern. It follows the principle of polarity, it follows the principle of correspondence, and it follows the principle that states that this is merely a continuum of thing, in this case energy, a continuum. There is no absence of energy, and there is no, absolute energy. All energy is continuous, and all energy is linked to all other energy. This butterfly effect or the spider web effect, however you want to think of it. I don't know how to best describe it. But it's amazing to me that, like I said, now that I'm peeking into this world of theoretical physics with these brilliant, brilliant people at school, it's amazing that we're taught things the wrong way first, that then enables us to learn them the right way. So you're taught as an initiate. Here, let me tell you the kindergarten version of an ionic bond. Let me tell you the kindergarten version of a covalent bond. Sharing of electrons versus stealing of electrons. And again, electron is a fantasy. Barbs, Drew, what's up? So in an ionic bond, I take an electron, and because this other half, let's say the feminine principle in Walter Russell's way of thinking, the feminine principle has lent basically that charge. The male principle has taken that charge, the domineering force, and the feminine principle bonds with it to retain the prospect of a return of that energy, let's say. And the feminine principle can be used in the form of hydrogen, let's say a proton, to absorb and then create. This just occurred to me. So in ATP synthesis, adenosine triphosphate is like the currency, the energy currency within cells. Cell metabolism uses ATP and adenosine diphosphate. These are energy counters, if you want to think of it in terms of keeping track of energy. So protons, individual hydrogen atoms, can accept a charge and readily offload a charge. They're also very small, and they have great affinity for anything that's electronegative. Protons are, in this Walter Russell way of thinking, the feminine principle. They accept and create. And this is something I think you and I have talked about before, Paul, the role of the feminine, the role of the masculine. And this idea from Hermeticism and this cosmology stuff, these are not opposites. They are parts of a whole that can't be completed because the two opposites, and you brought this up before, that yin and yang idea, they are forever combining and never combining. It's a cyclical wash. One is an integral part of the other. Without one, the other is not. Another way to think of this would be a picture of the chalice, where it's two faces facing one another, the silhouette, the side profile, one face facing another face with a gap in between, and the gap appears to be a chalice or a cup. It's whatever you see there. It's like looking at clouds, but the chalice can't exist without the faces, without the negative space created by the faces. And the faces can't exist without the absence of space created by the chalice that separates them. One cannot exist without the other, and neither really exists, and both actually exist. This Schrodinger's principle, sort of. So these two integral parts, sodium, back to the periodic table here, sodium is one step away from nobility, from the ideal, the Aristotelian mean, the perfect center, which would be the noble gases, neon, xenon, argon. These have a complete octet, a full valence shell, and they are perfectly happy, unaffected by anything, super chill. Neon exists in the environment as itself. It doesn't need to bond with anything. It doesn't want to bond with anything. It just is. I take one step away from that to the negative side, let's say, and I have chlorine with a -1 charge. If I'm back at neon, I take one step to the opposite side, the positive side, and I have sodium, Na. One deviation away from center gives me a masculine and feminine principle. And the combination of that masculine and feminine principle that are exactly one one step away from the ideal gives me a pair to bond. And that bond, again, I didn't finish that example. That bond isn't really a bond. They're not touching. They're not holding one another. And this is best expressed again with symbol. The yin and yang are not in contact with one another. The alchemists suggested that the space between the yin and yang, the black and white side of that symbol, is Mercury, the fluid that doesn't make any fucking sense. Mercury is a liquid metal at room temperature, and it defies all sorts of laws. It does crazy shit in laboratories when it's combined with the right chemicals. It's mind-blowing. But anyway, the sides are never in contact. And this is true at the atomic level for other atoms. Sodium and chloride, one example. That football stadium, the space around the basketball at the 50-yard line, that's the charge that exists around it. So most of the space of that atom, most of the space in that stadium is empty. But it's only empty to our senses, sense data. I can't sense it with my feelers and seers and smeller. That space is occupied with energy. We just don't know what energy really is. We can't understand the fundamental component that is transferred from thing to thing to thing, from electricity to heat to force to whatever. So that charge is effectively empty, and that charge is both a withdrawing force and a repelling force. Again, this polarity, the polarity of opposites. These aren't in fact opposites. It's simply poles of the one, the eternal one, the Tao, if you will. Sodium and chlorine are, as all atoms are, mostly empty space around nuclei. These nuclei repel one another because they're positively charged. The electrons that comprise their shells repel one another because they're negatively charged. Yet, because there is an imbalance, I am one step away from neon to the right, and I am one step away from neon to the left. I get harmony and a bond between these two atoms that's in constant motion. You can picture two, if you've ever seen those stress balls, it's these two balls you hold in your hand basically, and you can rotate them around one another and they stay in contact. This is what's happening, but faster than you can imagine, between these two atoms. So they're not actually in contact. They both repel and attract one another. This shit is blowing my mind the more I understand about chemistry and physics. And it makes me want to study this shit for the rest of my life. You guys have a good day. Hope you get some value out of that. Hi AF. Hello. Sorry I didn't greet you there. And Kev Boy. You guys have a good one. You guys have any questions? I got another 10 minutes here before I get in the gate. I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have. Throw them at me. I'll keep this open for another couple minutes. Nothing? All right, gang. Have a beautiful day.